Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep into Julie Zuo's The Making of a Manager.
Ooh, yeah.
It's one of those books that you've probably seen recommended a ton. I know I have.
Definitely a must read, especially for anyone in the leadership position or, hoping to be one someday.
Oh, that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's like getting a crash course in leadership, and it's taught by someone who helped build Facebook,
Right.
which is
Right. Talk about credentials.
pretty incredible. It doesn't matter if you're already managing a team, if you're hoping to lead a team someday, or if you just want to understand how to be a better team member.
I think that's what's so cool about this book. It's relevant no matter where you are in your career. Like, even if you're not a manager, you're still part of a team, right?
Totally. And I think we can all learn something from understanding what makes a good manager. And chapter 1 really jumps right into that fundamental question. What is management, really?
Yeah, and Julie Zhu has this really concise definition that I love. She says, the job of a manager is to get better outcomes from a team than you'd get from those individuals working alone.
It's about the impact, not the title, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's not getting bogged down in fancy titles or hierarchies. It's really about the results you achieve as a team.
I love that. And she uses this really clever analogy of a lemonade stand to illustrate that point.
Oh, yeah, the lemonade stand. I love that example.
Because just because you own the lemonade stand, it doesn't automatically make you a manager.
Right. It's not about owning the business. It's about driving the collective success of everyone involved.
Exactly. So you could be the most amazing lemonade maker in the world, but if you can't inspire and guide your team to work together effectively, you're not really managing, are you?
Nope, not at all. It's about making the whole team better, not just focusing on your own individual to-do list.
Now, Zuo breaks down management into 3 key pillars: purpose, people, and process.
Those are great pillars, and she really makes them come to life.
I love having frameworks like this because it helps me really kind of wrap my head around big concepts.
Yeah, me too. And starting with purpose, she really dives into the importance of everyone understanding the why behind what they're doing.
Okay, so you're not just telling people what to do, you're explaining how their work contributes to the bigger picture.
Exactly. So for the lemonade stand, it's not just about squeezing lemons and pouring lemonade. It's about understanding that you're part of a team that's trying to create a successful business, maybe even bring joy to your customers.
I love that. And then there's the people pillar, which is all about, as you expect, the people.
Yeah, people are at the heart of it all. It's about building strong relationships, understanding your team's motivations, and helping them grow.
It reminds me of that quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, and she really emphasizes that in the book. That sense of connection and trust is so important for building a high-performing team.
What about process? That one maybe sounds a little less exciting than purpose and people. What does she say about that?
I know, right? But she makes a really good argument for why process is essential.
Okay, tell me more.
It's not about being bureaucratic or stifling creativity. It's about creating the structure and systems that allow for smooth collaboration and efficient execution.
So it's setting clear expectations, having systems in place so it's not just chaos.
Exactly. Because without process, even the most talented and motivated team can get bogged down in confusion and inefficiency.
It's like having a recipe for making that lemonade. You can have the best ingredients, but if you don't follow the steps, you might end up with something that's not quite right.
Perfect analogy.
So we've got the 3 pillars: purpose, people, process. But let's face it, stepping into that management role for the first time, that can be really intimidating. I know I was terrified when I first became a manager.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge transition, and there are definitely a lot of unknowns.
So how do you navigate those initial challenges? Well, Zuo tackles that head on in chapter 2. She focuses on those crucial first 3 months as a manager, and she outlines 4 common paths to becoming a manager.
The 4 paths, I love this. Let's see if I remember them all.
Okay, quiz time. There's the apprentice, the pioneer, the new boss, and the successor.
Yes. Nailed it.
Each of these comes with its own unique set of hurdles. Like, let's say you're the apprentice, meaning you're now managing people who used to be your peers.
Ooh, that's got to be tough.
That can be so awkward. So how do you make that transition smoothly?
I remember she had a really good tip for that situation. She recommends scheduling one-on-one coffee chats with each team member.
Interesting. Why coffee chat specifically?
She says it helps to shift the dynamic from, buddy-buddy to manager report, but in a more casual setting.
So it's less formal than a meeting in your office. It's a way to connect on a personal level while also setting those clear expectations for their performance.
Exactly. And it can help ease that awkwardness because, you're still getting coffee with your friend, but now you're also their manager.
I like that. It's kind of like a way to acknowledge the shift in the relationship without making it a big formal thing.
Right. It's more organic. Now, what if you're the new boss? You're coming into an established team from the outside. I bet that's really challenging too.
That can be really tough. It's tempting to come in and think, okay, I'm going to shake things up. I've got all these new ideas.
Right. Like you want to prove yourself and make an impact.
Exactly. But Zuo actually advises against that.
Oh, really? So resist that urge to be the fix-it person right away.
Exactly. Instead, she recommends focusing on listening and building relationships first.
Okay, so humility and observation are key. You need to understand the team's dynamics and the existing processes before you can start implementing your own ideas.
Totally. You need to earn their trust and respect before you can start making big changes.
And that takes time. You can't just come in and expect people to follow you blindly. You have to build those relationships first.
Now, let's say you've successfully navigated those first 3 months. You're finding your groove as a manager. Chapter 3 digs into leading a small team. This is where the people pillar really comes into play.
This is where the real work begins, right?
Totally. And Zuo talks about her experience leading small teams at Facebook and how she fostered this culture of open feedback and collaboration.
Yeah, she's big on creating that safe space for people to share their ideas and learn from each other.
For example, she used to hold weekly design critiques with her team. And I'm curious, were these just about tearing apart designs? Or were they more collaborative?
Oh, they were definitely more collaborative. It wasn't about finding fault. It was about creating an open forum for everyone to give and receive constructive criticism to help each other improve.
Okay, so that sounds less intimidating and more like a learning opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. It was about creating a culture where everyone felt comfortable sharing their work and getting feedback. And that's essential because when your team feels comfortable being open about challenges, you can tackle them together.
Now, she also talks a lot about the importance of being human, not just the boss.
Being authentic, right?
Totally. Like being vulnerable, admitting mistakes, showing your team that you're not perfect.
Which can be really hard, especially when you're in a leadership position. There's that pressure to have all the answers.
Right, like you're supposed to have it all figured out. But she argues that being vulnerable actually makes you a more effective leader. Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Absolutely. People want to work for someone they can relate to, someone who's genuine. Remember that time I accidentally sent that email to the entire company instead of just to you?
Oh my gosh, yes. That was classic. But you know what? I think it actually made you more relatable to everyone.
Right. Because it showed that I'm human, I make mistakes too. And that made people feel more comfortable coming to me with their own mistakes or challenges.
That's so interesting. It's like that vulnerability creates a space for others to be vulnerable as well. And that can really strengthen those relationships.
Exactly. And speaking of challenges, even with a great team, you're going to encounter some difficult situations. Zuo doesn't shy away from those tough conversations.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, she has a whole section on dealing with toxic behavior, even if it's coming from someone who's otherwise a high performer.
Oh, wow. That's got to be so hard. It's tempting to overlook bad behavior if someone is delivering great results.
I know, it's a tough call. But she really argues that it's never worth it. Because even one toxic person can really poison the well for the entire team.
It's about creating a culture where everyone feels respected and supported, regardless of their individual performance.
Exactly. And sometimes letting go of that talented but toxic person is the best thing you can do for the health of your team. But that's a whole other conversation that I think we're going to have to dive into in part 2.
Yes. Let's put a pin in that one because I am really curious to hear more about her approach to those really tough situations. But I think we've covered a lot of ground already in this first part, and we've just scratched the surface of the making of a manager.
I know, right? There's so much good stuff in this book. I can't wait to dive into the rest of it with you in part 2. Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we jump back into the book,
Yeah?
I'd love to know what's resonated with you so far. What's really sticking with you?
You know, I think what's striking me the most is just how much Zuo emphasizes the human side of management.
I know, right?
It's not just about, the processes or the metrics. It's about building that trust, creating a positive team dynamic, and
Yeah.
fostering open communication,
Yeah.
which actually brings us back to what we were talking about right at the end of part one
Oh, right.
about how to deal with those
Yeah.
challenging situations, like having to give tough feedback or dealing with
Mm-hmm.
maybe a toxic team member. Those conversations that no manager really wants to have,
Oh, absolutely.
but are so important to being a good leader.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what insights does Zuo offer for how to deliver difficult feedback effectively?
Well, first of all, she has this amazing phrase that really resonated with me. She says, each major disappointment is a failure to set expectations.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. Because it really highlights how important it is to be crystal clear about expectations right from the start.
Yeah, if someone doesn't even know what's expected of them, how can they be successful?
Exactly. And if they don't know what's expected, then any feedback you give them can feel like a personal attack rather than an opportunity for growth.
Totally. So let's go back to that lemonade stand. If your employees think that their only job is to like squeeze lemons and pour lemonade, but you also expect them to be, marketing geniuses
Yeah.
and social media influencers, and you haven't told them
Yeah.
that there are going to be some unmet expectations there.
Yeah, for sure. Disappointment all around. So yeah, clear expectations are key. But even then, giving feedback, especially negative feedback, it can be really hard. It's uncomfortable.
It is, and I'll be honest, I've definitely been guilty of avoiding it until things reach a boiling point, which is probably not the best approach.
I think we've all been there. But Zuo has some really practical tips for making feedback less, I don't know, daunting and more effective. She talks about giving task-specific feedback frequently, especially right after a task is completed.
So don't wait for the formal performance review to give feedback. Give it in the moment.
Exactly, because that way you can reinforce good behaviors and also, correct course before those little issues become big problems.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like preventing those little spills at the lemonade stand from turning into a whole sticky mess.
Exactly. And another tip she gives is to really focus on the specific task rather than making it personal.
Oh.
So instead of saying you're always late with reports, you could say something like, this report was due yesterday and it's important to meet deadlines.
Oh, that's a much better way to phrase it. It's addressing the behavior, not attacking the person.
Right. And on the flip side, don't forget to give praise when it's deserved. Sometimes I think as managers, we get so caught up in, fixing problems that we forget to acknowledge the good stuff.
That's so true. We need to celebrate those wins too. But okay, feedback isn't just about giving it. It's also about receiving it gracefully, which honestly can be even harder sometimes.
Oh my gosh, yes. It can be so hard to not get defensive when you're receiving criticism, even if you know it's well-intentioned.
I think that's just human nature.
Yeah.
But Zuo gives some great advice for developing a more receptive mindset. She says, actively seek out feedback, both from your team and from other managers.
Don't just wait for it to come to you. Go out and ask for it.
Exactly. By actively seeking feedback, you're signaling that you're open to learning and growing.
And it can make it easier to receive that constructive criticism because you're already in that mindset of, I want to improve.
And she also recommends finding a mentor or a coach who can provide you with an objective perspective and help you identify those blind spots.
That's so valuable. It's like having someone in your corner who can give you that honest feedback, but without sugarcoating it.
Right. And I think this actually leads perfectly into the next chapter, which focuses on managing yourself, which is something that I think a lot of us, especially when we're first starting out as managers,
Yeah.
kind of forget to do.
I know, right? It's so easy to get so focused on leading others that we neglect our own well-being and development.
Well, Chapter 5 is all about that.
About-
And Zuo actually shares her own experience of feeling overwhelmed and doubting herself.
Yeah, which is so refreshing to hear from someone who's accomplished so much. She's not afraid to admit that she struggles too.
And a lot of that she attributes to imposter syndrome, that feeling of, I'm not qualified to be here, I don't know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of new managers especially
No,
experience.
absolutely. I've definitely been there.
But she emphasizes that self-awareness is key.
Knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, and your triggers.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about understanding yourself.
And then finding strategies to manage those tendencies.
She actually hired an executive coach to help her with that.
Oh, that's a great idea. I've never thought about doing that, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's like having someone who can help you gain that self-awareness and then develop those strategies for managing your time and energy. So what are some of those strategies that she recommends?
One thing she talks about is identifying your ideal work conditions. Like, what environment allows you to really thrive.
Do you need quiet time to focus? Do you do your best work in a collaborative setting?
Exactly. Once you understand those preferences, then you can create a more productive work environment for yourself. I know I do my best work in the morning, so I try to block off that time for my most important tasks. I also need quiet to focus, so I've invested in some noise-canceling headphones, and they've been a lifesaver.
Those little adjustments can make such a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. And she also talks about the importance of recognizing your triggers, those things that tend to set you off or throw you off balance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely have those. Like when there are just a million interruptions or when people miss deadlines.
Oh, yeah, those are classic triggers. But once you're aware of them, you can manage your reactions more effectively. So instead of getting, frustrated or overwhelmed, you can have a plan for how to handle those situations calmly and productively.
Okay, so it all comes back to self-management.
Exactly. You need to manage yourself before you can effectively manage others. But speaking of things that can be a little stressful, let's talk about meetings.
Oh yeah, meetings. The necessary evil of the workplace.
Yeah.
Chapter 6 is all about making meetings amazing, which, I have to admit, sounded a little far-fetched to me when I first saw the title.
I know, right? Like, who actually enjoys meetings?
I've always viewed them as something to be endured rather than enjoyed. But Zua makes a really compelling case for why meetings can be, if not enjoyable, at least productive and energizing. So what's her secret? How do we transform meetings from dreaded to delightful?
Well, she starts by challenging the assumption that all meetings are bad. She actually believes they can be really valuable when done right. And her first tip is to go beyond having a vague purpose. You need to define a really concrete, desired outcome for every single meeting.
So what specific decision needs to be made? What information needs to be shared? What questions need to be answered?
Exactly. Having that clarity from the outset can really make a huge difference in how the meeting runs and in what you're able to accomplish.
It's like having a roadmap for the meeting.
Right, exactly. You're not just wandering aimlessly. You know where you're going and how you're going to get there. And once you have that desired outcome in mind, it helps to ensure that you're only inviting the people who are truly essential to achieving that outcome.
Okay, so no more courtesy invites or people sitting in on meetings who don't really need to be there.
Exactly. It's all about respecting everyone's time and making the meeting truly productive.
And speaking of being productive, she also emphasizes the importance of preparation.
Oh, yes, sending out materials ahead of time. That's so important.
Because no one wants to sit there reading a document for the first time when they could have been preparing beforehand.
Right. It's about setting everyone up for success and making the most of that precious meeting time.
Now let's move on to something that is both exciting and terrifying. Hiring.
Oh, yes, hiring. It's such a high-stakes decision.
Chapter 7 is all about that process, and I'll be honest, I always get a little nervous about making the wrong hire.
It can be scary because the wrong person can really impact your team's dynamics and productivity.
Totally. So how do you avoid making that mistake?
Well, Zua actually reframes the whole idea of hiring. It's not just about filling a vacant role, it's about building the future of your team.
Oh, I like that. It's a much more strategic way to think about it.
And it all starts with defining the ideal candidate.
So no more generic job descriptions.
Right. You need to be really specific about what skills and experience are absolutely essential for this role, and also what kind of personality and work style will thrive in your team culture.
You're not just looking for someone who can do the job, you're looking for someone who will be a good fit.
Exactly. And it's not just about attracting the right candidates, it's also about creating a positive interview experience.
So even if someone isn't ultimately chosen for the role, they still walk away with a good impression of your company.
Exactly. She recommends regular communication throughout the process and also, expressing genuine excitement about the candidate's potential.
So it's not just about them trying to impress you, it's about you selling them on the opportunity as well.
Exactly. And another really important point she makes is about hiring for diversity.
It's not just a box to check. It's about bringing in a range of perspective that will actually enrich your team.
Absolutely. Diversity in thought, background, and experience leads to better ideas, better solutions, and ultimately a more innovative and adaptable team.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so you've got a great team in place. You've clarified expectations. Everyone's on board with the vision. Chapter 8 shifts the focus to execution, actually making those plans happen. This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
It is, and it's where all that planning and preparation pays off.
So how do you ensure that all that hard work translates into results.
Well, Zuo emphasizes that you need to start with a concrete vision.
Not just some vague inspirational statement, but a clear and specific picture of what success looks like.
Exactly, something that everyone can rally behind and understand, and that vision then needs to be translated into a believable game plan.
A strategy that you can actually execute, that's realistic, and takes into account all the potential obstacles.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting. Zuo actually argues that perfect execution trumps a perfect strategy.
Wait, really? Why is that? I would think having the right strategy is the most important thing.
I know, it seems counterintuitive, but she makes a really good point. Strategies can always be adjusted along the way, but failing to act, waiting for everything to be perfect, that's what truly hinders progress.
Okay, that makes sense. It's better to start moving and course correct as you go than to get stuck in analysis paralysis.
Exactly. And another helpful tool she introduces here is the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. But how does it apply to management?
Well, Zuo suggests that we focus on the 20% of activities that actually drive 80% of the results. Identify those high-impact tasks and prioritize them ruthlessly.
So it's about being really strategic with your time and energy.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to delegate or eliminate tasks that aren't essential to achieving those goals.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Building a strong team, setting clear expectations, giving effective feedback, managing yourself, running productive meetings, hiring the right people, and executing plans with a focus on that 20% that really matters. Wow, I'm feeling inspired and a little overwhelmed. But is there more?
There is, and it gets even more complex as your team grows. Chapter 9 tackles the challenges of leading a larger team, and things definitely shift as you move from managing a handful of people to overseeing a larger group. I know it was a big adjustment for me.
Okay, so what are some of the key differences between managing small teams and leading larger ones?
Well, one big shift is moving from direct to indirect management.
When your team is small, you can have those personal interactions with everyone. But as it grows, you have to delegate more, empower other leaders, and really trust your team to handle things without your direct involvement.
It's a lot of letting go.
It is. And another challenge is just the way people perceive you as you move up the management ladder. Like people might start treating you differently. They might be more cautious or hesitant to share their true opinions.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. You have to be really mindful of that power dynamic and make an extra effort to encourage that open communication.
So even though you're the boss, you still want to create that safe space where people feel comfortable coming to you with their ideas and concerns.
Right. And as your team grows, so does your workload. You're probably juggling more projects, more meetings, more decisions, and that can be really overwhelming. It's important to have strategies for managing that complexity and prioritizing your time effectively.
So that context switching becomes even more crucial.
Exactly. You need to be able to shift your focus quickly and efficiently. Zuo actually talks about finding that right balance between staying informed and avoiding micromanaging. You need to trust your team to do their jobs, but you also need to be aware of what's going on and be available to provide support when needed.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is, and delegation becomes even more critical. You can't possibly do everything yourself, so you need to identify the right people for the right tasks and empower them to make decisions.
That not only frees you up to focus on those bigger picture things, but it also helps your team members grow and develop.
It's a win-win. Now, I'm really curious about Chapter 10, which focuses on something that we talk about a lot but rarely define: culture.
It's one of those things that everyone seems to agree is important.
Yeah.
But what is it really?
Right. And how do you actually create it? Well, Zuo dives into the nitty-gritty of nurturing that, heart of your team.
Shaping that personality in a way that actually supports your goals and values. So it's not something that just happens organically. You have to be really intentional about it.
Exactly. She encourages managers to really think about the kind of team they want to be a part of.
So what are those non-negotiable values? What's the vibe you're going for?
And once you have that clear in your mind, it's about putting those values into action.
Leading by example.
Mm.
Walking the walk.
Yeah.
Not just talking the talk.
Right. Your actions speak louder than words. And your team is going to pick up on any disconnect between what you say and what you do. It's all about consistency and authenticity.
So how do you actually go about nurturing that culture? What tactics does she recommend?
She talks about establishing traditions and rituals that really embody those team values.
It could be something as simple as sharing personal stories at the beginning of meetings to build connections, or having a monthly award to recognize outstanding contributions.
Yeah, little things like that can really make a big difference in reinforcing that culture. And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of reinforcing and adapting those values as your team grows and evolves.
It's like tending a garden.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
You have to nurture it, you have to prune it, and you have to make adjustments as needed.
To keep it thriving. Now, throughout this book, Zuo emphasizes that being a manager is about more than just getting things done.
It's about creating an environment where people can thrive, where they can grow and develop and achieve their full potential.
I love that. It's so human-centered. It's not just about the bottom line. It's about creating a positive experience for everyone.
And that's what makes this book so valuable. It's not just a dry textbook on management theory. It's a guide to becoming the kind of leader that people actually want to follow.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything from part 2. But there's still one more chapter to go. And I think it's a really important one, especially in today's world where things are constantly changing.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about how to build a team that's not only high-performing, but also resilient. A team that can adapt and thrive in the face of uncertainty. And that's what we'll be diving into in part 3.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Julie Zuo's The Making of a Manager. And in this final part, we're going to tackle something that's so crucial in today's world. Building a team that's not just high-performing, but also resilient. A team that can adapt and thrive in the face of constant change, which, let's face it, is kind of the norm these days.
It really is. And one of the things that Zuo emphasizes is fostering a growth mindset within the team. It's about moving away from that fear of failure and instead viewing those setbacks as opportunities to learn and get better.
So instead of like pointing fingers when things go wrong, you're asking, okay, what can we learn from this?
Exactly. What can we do better next time?
And that makes so much sense because if everyone's afraid to make mistakes, you're not going to get very far.
No, you're not going to have much innovation.
Nothing new is going to happen.
Right. Everyone's just going to be playing it safe.
And that ties back to the idea of psychological safety, right? That feeling that you can speak up, share your ideas, take risks
Without being judged or punished.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is so important. But how do you actually create that?
It can seem intangible, but it really starts with you, the manager.
Okay.
Zuo suggests modeling vulnerability by admitting when you don't know something, by asking for help, by showing your team that it's okay to not be perfect.
So, lead by example. If the manager is comfortable admitting their mistakes, it gives everyone else permission to do the same.
Yeah, and be open to feedback, even if it's negative.
Yeah.
Show your team that you're always learning and growing and that you value their input.
And that creates that culture of feedback and continuous improvement that I think is so important.
It is.
So modeling vulnerability, being open to feedback. Are there other ways to build that psychological safety, especially as things are changing so quickly these days?
Another big one is empowering your team to make decisions. So resisting that urge to micromanage and instead giving people the autonomy to actually solve problems and make decisions on their own.
Of course, you still need to provide guidance and support.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's about finding that balance between control and freedom.
Right, exactly. And when you empower your team like that, you're not just making their lives easier,
Yeah.
you're also fostering their growth and development, which ultimately benefits everyone.
It's like that rising tide lifts all boats kind of situation.
Exactly. Now, something we haven't talked about much is recognizing and celebrating success, which is something that I think is so easy to forget in the day-to-day grind.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's easy to just focus on what's next, what needs to be fixed, what problems need to be solved.
You get so caught up in putting out fires that you forget to acknowledge the wins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Zuo really stresses the importance of making a habit of celebrating those successes, both big and small.
Yeah, whether it's a simple thank you, a shout out during a team meeting,
Yeah.
or like a team celebration, taking that time to recognize those achievements really makes a difference.
It shows that you're paying attention
It does.
and that you value their hard work,
And it reinforces that idea that you're all in this together.
that you're a team.
Right. Working towards a shared goal.
And that brings us to one of the biggest takeaways from this book, which is that being a manager is about so much more than just getting things done.
It really is.
It's about creating that environment where people can thrive, where they can learn, grow, and achieve their full potential.
And then feel valued.
Yes, and feel supported in doing that,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is what I really love about Julie Zuo's approach.
It's so human-centered.
It is. It's not just about the bottom line. It's about creating that positive and fulfilling work experience.
Absolutely. And that's what makes The Making of a Manager such a great read. It's not just a dry textbook on management theory. It's a guide to becoming the kind of leader that people actually want to follow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. What resonated with you today?
Yeah.
What one thing will you try differently, whether you're a manager or a team member? Because I think even if you're not a formal leadership role, the principles in this book can help you be a more effective collaborator and contributor.
No matter where you are in your career journey, there's something in this book for you.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the making of a manager. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading.